with me today. I'm so excited because basically without this person, Two Geek Soup probably would not exist, because it was my conversations with you, Jeff Mitchell, that originally made me want to do a podcast like this in the first place. So welcome. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yay. All right. So, before we get too much into, the stuff that we're going to be talking about today, why don't you tell us a little bit about what got you into geek culture to begin with? Like, what's your earliest remembrance of a geeky thing that made you just like...
The earliest thing I geeked out about, if we go like way early, it would have to be when I was 5 or 6 and the NES came out. And we rented one from JJ Video, which was at that time you could rent. I don't know if they do that today. I mean, the whole rental thing is kind of going out the window. But yeah, you would rent like
at Family Video, you can totally rent a system
because they were like $100, which back then is literally like $200 of today's money for an NES.
Yeah,
which is kind of mind blowing when you think about it. But it was like the original Super Mario Brothers was what I was super into. Like, it was amazing to me. And then I think the first signs of like really going overboard was when, so we got an NES one time. I mean, I would bug my mom every weekend. Can we rent an NES this weekend? Can we rent one? Can we rent a Nintendo? I didn't ever call it the NES back then.
Right, of course not.
Can we rent a Nintendo? And like everyone knew, like you don't have to specify what Nintendo you're talking about. Like you do today. Like there was only one, and everybody knew about it. And there was one weekend where my stepdad's parents were visiting, and at that time they lived in Tennessee, and they came up from Tennessee, and they were visiting, and I was 6 years old, buggy as ever. Can we rent a Nintendo? Over and over, probably. And I remember we went to this store called Service Merchandise.
Yes.
And at one point, my mom and stepdad were like, we're going to go do some shopping over here. You stay with Aunt Mary and Uncle Jim, which is what we called my stepdad's parents. And I didn't think anything of it. So it's like they kept telling me, we'll see. And you can probably guess where this
right, yeah, you can see this coming a mile away.
So we get home, and I was probably asking a dozen times on the way home, right? And then they're like, they kept saying, we'll see, we'll see. And then at one point, they're like, well, why don't you look at what's in this bag when we were inside? And they had just randomly picked up a Nintendo system.
That's awesome.
So I was super excited. We had Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt, but to get back to the first time that I sort of went overboard, I guess you could say, like really geeking out, was when one day randomly we would always rent games before we bought them, and when Super Mario Brothers 3 came out, we loved it. And one day Tony came home from work. Tony's my stepdad.
Right.
Tony came home from work, and he just had randomly bought it one day. It was like the best day of my childhood up to that point.
That's awesome.
And so I remember poring over when I couldn't play, because they limited the amount of hours that I played with good reason.
Yes.
And when I couldn't play, I remember like poring over the manual for the game. And one time I snuck it with me to school in first grade.
Did you set up one of the books that you were supposed to read and read that thing behind it?
Well, the thing is I was kind of a precocious kid. So I think my teacher probably appreciated me bringing stuff like that, because I think my parents would have disapproved because they didn't want me to get too obsessed, but unfortunately that happened anyway.
Right.
There was nothing they could do about it. No amount of limitations were going to stop it, really. My teachers, from what my parents tell me, would say the biggest problem was that I would get done with my work too quickly, and then distract the other kids who were still trying to work. So I'm pretty sure I would just do my work, and then I pulled out the booklet at some point.
Yeah.
And I'm sure my teacher was breathing a sigh of relief at that point because I was engrossed in something instead of bugging other kids. So that was the earliest thing, but I think if I were to, like, that was the most I ever really got geeked about anything Mario franchise as a kid.
Right.
And then time went on, and I think the first time I got super into a particular franchise was, and I guess to summarize to our listeners, whoever may be out there, like, I'm mostly a video game geek. I've started getting into the Marvel Cinematic Universe recently with the encouragement of John. Mostly the encouragement of John. I remember you telling me, like, before you see the Avengers, when the first Avengers was coming out, go back. You need to go watch Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America, and that's when I started, actually really paying attention to these movies. Also because I knew Joss Whedon was doing
right.
Avengers, and I had recently, not at the time they came out, but more like after college, and once Netflix became a thing, I started watching Buffy and Angel, which are admittedly super campy and cheesy, but it's like intentional, so I can forgive it,
Right, exactly.
But anyway, before all that, it's like I was mostly a video game geek. And the first franchise that really sucked me in to geek levels was the Legend of Zelda series. Specifically, well, I didn't get into it when it first came out. We never had it on the NES.
Oh, that's interesting.
We never had a Super Nintendo. I had a Game Boy at my dad's, and my stepbrother had a Nintendo 64. And so the sparse times I was over there was when I would play. And the reason I got into Zelda, it's kind of funny, like, was because I had a subscription to Nintendo Power at the time, and Link's Awakening for the Game Boy was consistently voted like the top game for the Game Boy.
Yeah.
Every issue they had a little section where like all of the readers could basically mail in votes. Mm-hmm. And mail was a thing back then, like email didn't exist.
For our younger listeners, there was a before times when
so
if you wanted to communicate with people, you would actually physically write things down on a piece of paper and apply a sticky special sticker to the front of an envelope and put it in a magic box. And then it would transport itself to its intended recipient most of the time.
And that's how Nintendo Power readers voted on the best games for each system. And the top game was always Zelda Link's Awakening. The top game for the SNES was always Zelda Link to the Past. So I was like, I need to see what this game's all about. And so I finally convinced my dad to get it for me, or maybe I bought it with my own money, like a used copy. And I loved it. But what really got me into the franchise was when my brother and I went in halvesies and bought Ocarina of Time. I know in American language it's Ocarina, but I think we've talked about this.
I have talked about this multiple times.
The word itself is, there's a big argument among geekdom of, do you say Ocarina or Ocarina? My answer is it's Ocarina.
Yeah, because an ocarina is an actual thing.
It's an actual instrument, and it comes from Italy. And it's an Italian word, and in Italy they say ocarina, so I say that's the way we should say it. But if you look online, the accepted answer is either way, and the American answer is ocarina. I've always said ocarina. I started saying ocarina because other people did, but it's a whole big thing. But anyway.
It sounds like, hey, ocarina.
Yeah. That game, not only, like, it was probably one of the first games to really develop the lore in the Zelda universe, and it was the first one that kind of sucked me in as well.
We are going to need to do like an entire episode on Zelda lore, so let's just go ahead and get off that crazy train
we'll get
right
off
here.
That. We'll get off that. Suffice it to say, I would sit in church thinking about Ocarina of Time when I was a freshman in high school. Like, anyway, so that's that's kind of my geek background.
Okay. So in terms then of your major geek specialties, we kind of hit on this already. You're primarily a gamer.
Yeah. Oh, and I missed one. The other big franchise, and this is kind of strange because being older relatively to other people into the franchise, but I'm super into Pokemon. And when I with a caveat, super into the Pokemon games.
Right.
I never got into the anime. I was a little bit too old for that, I
Yeah.
think.
So in terms of the games, then both the actual trading card game and the video games, correct?
I dabbled in the trading card game, but like most trading card games, I came to the conclusion that while it was fun, there the ratio of money and time spent to like enjoyment is way too high.
Right.
Like I got more into Magic the Gathering for about a year or so. And I would say as a whole,
same conclusion again.
yes, I came to the same conclusion again. I looked at like what I wanted to do with Magic and realized that I would be spending $140 a month. Like I did, that's not even a guess. That's a literal, like I did the math.
You did the math.
And I was like, I can't justify that.
Yeah,
like
right.
Video games are a much, much cheaper hobby.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't mean you shouldn't get into trading card games if it's something you really like. But like, and I will say like the Magic the Gathering trading card system appealed to me much more than the way that the Pokemon trading card game is set up.
And we're probably going to do a whole segment with you also about Pokemon.
Yeah. So I got into that ironically like years after like it had started. Like I had played, like I was in high school. I'm probably taking too much time in this segment, but I was in high school, like late junior high, early high school when Pokemon came out, and it was cool to make fun of it.
Right.
So
like, oh, that's that thing the weird middle schoolers are doing.
I thought it was like a kid's thing, right? I thought it was like just for kids, and a lot of people think that it's like geared just for kids. But in getting into the games, I realized that, well, I might have said this to you before, but I always say like the strategy involved in Pokemon is as deep as you want to make it. And it's the most strategic game I have ever played. Like it's up there with Magic the Gathering. It's up there with chess. Like it's like chess just with different pieces. If you get into like competitive battling, which I've barely scratched the surface of. But it was funny because my younger cousin had a copy of Pokemon Blue on vacation one time, and I started playing it, and I was like, wow, this is like a turn-based RPG where you can basically recruit any of the wild monsters you find. I was like, that is a pretty cool concept. And like, it just makes the variety of what you can do with your party and things like that is just almost limitless, and I think that's one of the appealing things. But we can talk about that in a different episode.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna have you try to explain Pokemon to Joshua at some point here, and that'll be fun.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, see, I thought that we were going to be able to transition organically into something interesting to talk about, but now I'm kind of out of ideas until we get to Thor. But I think we
don't have to be super organic. It can be semi.
Yeah.
Okay, here I can do an organic intro. And now one of the things I'm geeking out about is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And today I rewatched Thor.
Okay, let's go ahead and get into Thor, and then if we happen to have we can probably talk about Thor for a long enough time to round out the episode, and that'll range all over the place. So
let me just say too that one of the coolest things. So I recently, as you know, practically binge watched seasons 1 through 4 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And although at the very beginning I thought it was a little bit cheesy, overall I ended up loving it. And
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say one of the coolest things of going back and watching some of the earlier MCU movies is seeing all of the